Hello everyone, this is Ayush and welcome to this video on best practices for lazy loading in Angular. As the tagline suggests, sometimes lazy is what you need. And to prove that, in this video, I'll discuss what lazy loading is, why it's useful, and how to implement it effectively in your Angular application. We'll also cover some best practices and tips for working with lazy loading, as this being the motto of the complete series. Before getting into the context, to give you a glimpse of performance improvements when utilizing lazy loading, let me give you an example. Here I have hosted two websites with the same components. Just the left side is using lazy loading feature and right side is not using it. And I've disabled the cache in both the places along with throttled it to fast 3G so that we can see the performance in the same network conditions. So let me refresh both the pages. On the left hand side, you can see that it took 1.33 seconds to load the complete page, whereas on the right hand side, it took almost 6 seconds to go and fetch the complete pages, right? And if I now go and check the websites, it's going to have the same kind of behavior. Let me go to the orders website, right? And home as well, right? So I've added a filter to just show you the overall uh, picture. So it took almost like, and here also the image, just ignore that image part, but apart from that you can see that this took almost 5.47 seconds to complete the main.js file, where it took 1.33 seconds to complete this one. Though we also have two different chunks which got loaded in the background once we clicked on customer and orders. Here actually I've utilized the prefetching technique, so it was loading in the background as soon as I refresh the page, but we'll talk about that during the demo. With that, let me take you back to the concept and how to implement it effectively. First, let's define what lazy loading means in the context of an Angular application. Lazy loading is a technique that defers the loading of certain modules and the components until they are actually needed. For, to take an analogy, lazy loading is like opening a book. You only load the pages you need when you need them, right? This can result in faster initial load time, smaller bundle size, and improved performance overall. And one of the major benefit is the user experience. Think of you being a user and waiting for 6 seconds for a page to load, where you also have an option to have the page loaded within 1.5 seconds, right? So this is basically what lazy loading means. Now let's dive into how do you go and actually implement lazy loading in your Angular application. The first and foremost step is to identify the modules and components that you want to load lazily. Typically, you would want to lazy load modules that are not needed for the initial render of the application, such as modules for certain features or pages that the user may not visit right away. Once you have identified the modules and components that you want to lazy load, you can use the Angular router to configure routing. Let me take you to the code where I have implemented lazy loading. Yeah, so here actually I've created an app module. Inside that app module, we have two different components as well as modules. The first one is the customers component, and it has its own module. Other is the orders module, right, which internally has customers and orders components, right? So if I go to the app routing module.ts, to implement lazy loading of modules, what we can do is, and what you can see here is, when I'm actually hitting the path of customers, then only I'm loading the children, where it is loading a specific module, and from that module it is just taking the customers module, right? And similarly for orders. So what will happen is, when I'll hit this path of customers, at that point of time it will go and import the module. right? And similarly for orders. Another thing which is a best practice, and we'll come back to that, is the preloading strategy, where I have actually defined that once the page is loaded, I can go and start loading the modules in the background, and this will help us to basically load the pages itself initially itself within chunks, rather than loading all of them at one go. And the user also does not need to wait when actually they click on a certain link or a certain path, right? So that is basically how the lazy loading module is used. And just to give you a glimpse, the customer module is a simple Angular module. It does not have any paths and anything. Here also I can define certain paths, but yeah, this one is straight away direct. And when the route is only empty, then it is loading the customer component, and similar for the orders component as well. Right. So while lazy loading can be a powerful tool for optimizing your Angular application, it's important to use it correctly in order to avoid any potential issues. One best practice is to be strategic about what to choose lazy load. As I said, this is one of the critical items. You should only lazy load modules and components that are not needed for the initial render of your application. Additionally, you should avoid lazy loading modules that have interdependencies. Let's say the customer is calling orders and orders is calling home. I cannot lazy load customers because it might have an interdependency, and it will create unnecessary complexity as well as potential issues. Another best practice is to keep your lazy loaded modules and components as self contained as possible. What does that mean is they should not actually rely on global services or state that is managed by other part of your application, as this can lead to unexpected behavior and difficult, and this is very difficult to debug as well. Instead, each lazy loaded module should have its own service and state management that are separate from the rest of the application. Before summarizing, let me tell you another best practice, which is to use preloading, which will improve your user experience by a lot. Preloading is a technique that loads some of the modules and components in the background while the user is interacting with the application. This can reduce the time it takes to load the modules and components on demand and provide a smoother user experience. There's a concept of resolver which can, whenever you are using preloading, but that is for some other video. Uh, so finally, it's important you keep your lazy loaded modules and components small and focused. This means avoiding unnecessary dependency, keeping the code base as clean and simple as possible, which will make our which will make your life easier to maintain and update your application over time. This was a brief overview of the benefits of lazy loading in Angular and some best practices for implementing it. By using lazy loading effectively, you can improve the performance drastically, as we have seen, and maintainability of your application is also going to get improved. And on top of all, the user experience will be far better than I being a user waiting for 6 seconds for a page load to happen. Rather, if I have an option for that page load to happen within 1.5 second, I will always go for option number 2. That's it for the video. uh, Thank you all for watching.